Back on MorningLine, our guest with us this morning, News Channel 5, legal analyst Nick Leonardo, talking about some of the penalties in place. As a matter of fact, Nick, okay, so as we talked about camping and this law signed into law by the governor, I mean, it really, up to felony, punishable up to 6 years in prison rather than a misdemeanor. Convictions result in a revocation of your ability to vote. Be clear on this. When we went to the break, you kind of said, all right, this law is on the books, but it's left to each county's individual district attorney to decide whether to prosecute, correct? I mean, that's how it would work. If someone's arrested in Davidson County for being outside the Capitol, then it would be then sent to the DA to decide what to do from there, right?
Well, that's correct. And, actually that was, this is all directed at Nashville. There's no doubt about that. I mean, Gallatin, Waynesboro, Halls, Tennessee, Parsons, they don't have problems with protests. This is directed at Davidson County, as was most of this legislation. And actually, there was a portion of the legislation that got struck that would require the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee to be the one who prosecutes these protests, whatever, again, how you define that word. And that portion of the bill was stricken, but now each elected official in each district attorney in their jurisdiction has to report back to the DA's conference on the prosecution conviction rate of these cases, and then that will be forwarded to the Attorney General. But yes, it's going to be up to, at this time, still today, to our District Attorney General Glenn Funk to determine whether or not these children are prosecuted. And so a lot of times what we see, if this is a felony, this camping statute, then maybe General Funk will offer disorderly conduct, or maybe he'll offer a lesser offense that doesn't implicate these extremely harsh penalties. However, for us to get appellate review as a people, we have to have somebody who is convicted of this. So there'll have to be someone go forward in order to get convicted so that we could, I think, so that person would have standing to challenge it. But yes, it's going to be up to the DA, and I just can't imagine that our DA, from what we've seen of him thus far, would make felons and destroy voting rights for people who are just advocating for more of a voice for those that have been marginalized or those whose voices are not heard in our society.
Yeah, I think that's why you clearly understood maybe why the supporters of this bill wanted to have it in the hands of the Attorney General, because I can tell you right now, I personally know a number of district attorneys, and I can tell you right off the top of my head, and I'm not going to name names, I know at least half of them would not think of saddling a young person with a felony for camping. They may be arrested for that, but they're not going to prosecute it for it. I can just tell you that ain't happening. And that's part of the reason, because they need to be reelected in that county where they live. And a lot of these people do live there, all right? And so that's just not going to happen.
Well, and I think it's important to note that, one of the big demands of these individuals that were, who were doing the occupation, they called it the Ida B. Wells occupation, they were wanting to meet with the governor. And, it's odd how things have changed quite a bit. I remember when former Speaker Beth Harwell was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She would meet with Mr. Jones and a couple of representatives, several times a year. And they would really try to, they may not have agreed on the issues, and they may not have come up with a resolution that they all liked, but the discourse was civil and voices were being heard and communication was being had. And so, I can't help but wonder if this governor would have met with a couple of these individuals, and if things maybe would have worked out differently, or we might have a more amicable environment. But again, Speaker Harwell, who's a Republican, she was meeting with these young people, and it seemed like we had a little bit better of an environment when people's voices were actually being heard, or at least they felt like they were being heard, and potentially progress was being made on issues that matter to these individuals.
Let's take some more phone calls for you. We've got next up is Lee. Good morning, Lee. Go ahead. What's your comment, Lee?
Well, my comment, Nick, to both of you, I respect these children. I call them children because they are children. They really do not know what they're protesting about or how to go about it other than violence and, just, getting in assemblies where, they, like anybody, if you're going to do something, you need a permit to do it. They're not doing this. They're tying up our streets. They're destroying public property. We have representative, he calls himself over here, that believes that, destroying something because, it's not coming out of his pocket like downtown when he went to the courthouse and burned it and everything. These people are coming from other states and everything down here to start these protests and try to organize them, but they're doing it in the wrong way.
All right, Nick, let's address that a bit. I think a lot of people like Lee, when they think about protests, and there's different types of it, and you can address what we saw at the Capitol most recently and these campers with, there's a real difference there. And I think almost all of us are going to agree 100%, including, if you catch them candidly, some of these protesters, that starting the courthouse on fire is not only wrong, it's criminal, and they should be prosecuted. I have absolutely no problem with drilling every single one of them that broke a window at that courthouse or looted 2nd Avenue. They should all have the book thrown at them, all right? The difference is, when you're not getting violent and vandalizing, maybe you're gathering in a place where you may be crossing over into trespassing or something where the area becomes more gray. But I think a lot of people look at what happened to that fateful night when we had all that looting and destruction, and they point to that. And can you talk about how I think that is clearly a different thing than maybe the campers at the Capitol?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I mean, I agree with the caller. I agree with you. Even though these individuals that set the courthouse on fire, I mean, that's a crime. They need to be prosecuted. That's wrong. The people who were looting on Broadway, they need to be prosecuted. That's wrong. They're entitled to a defense. They're entitled to some lawyer to represent them. But I think that is blurring the message between the people that are actually protesting for change in a nonviolent, peaceful way. That just will not leave a premises versus people that, and the caller's right, there have been some arrests from individuals that have come from other states. But without a doubt, setting the courthouse on fire is wrong. That looting is wrong. However, on their side of things, they would say that, in the Boston Tea Party, they threw the tea overboard because that was the only thing that mattered to the king in an effort to get their attention. It doesn't make it right. I'm not saying that I agree. I'm just saying that's probably what they would argue, is that if you, I guess, hit people where it hurts, maybe you get attention. But I personally think that that's not the way to go about this by any stretch of the imagination. And I can assure you that if you do engage in some kind of vandalism, or in this case, putting the lives of first responders in jeopardy by trying to set the courthouse on fire, you certainly need to be prosecuted. And we know that you will be prosecuted here in this jurisdiction.
And so the difference, Nick, and we can go back to, the sit-ins and all of that, is that the folks who are outside the Capitol in general, maybe trespassing, maybe being beyond curfew or whatever they call it, but that would be a form of civil disobedience, not criminal disobedience, but civil disobedience. And your take on that is that passing a law that restricts someone who stands in place and is there trying to make a point is not an American way.
Well, we have been founded upon and must continue to have good and necessary trouble in this country. And the example that you gave, the civil disobedience example, that is good and necessary trouble. And I think most people would agree that that brings about change. Setting the courthouse on fire, I don't think you'll find anyone that would consider that good and necessary trouble. So I do think there's a huge difference.
Yeah, okay, I gotcha. Let's go next to Fran. Hi, Fran. Good morning. What's on your mind, Fran?
Yes, I have two things I'd like to hit on right quick.
Sure.
And the first one is, okay, the gentleman that had called earlier about the protesters, wondering if they had jobs or not, what he need to understand is he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. And the biggest majority of those people out there protesting, they are just trying to get what they have been cheated out of all their lives. And the second thing I want to say is, the devil is on the move. He's doing his job. His job is to rob, steal, kill, cheat, and lie. And what's going on up there in Washington on Pennsylvania Avenue is not in the name of humanity. It's not in the name of God. It's in the name of man. And instead of these people going around here worshiping Trump, they better start praising God.
Okay. It's interesting. the protests that are happening. And Nick, it's kind of off point of what we're discussing right here, but I think you and I are both aware of what happened with the shooting of the African-American man 7 times in the back in Wisconsin, this week, and the protests that turned violent just last night, and how heated that's gotten, and there's different levels of protest and reaction to certain situations, and that's a place where, that type of thing where you really see it escalating.
Yeah, and well said, friend. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, what we are seeing are people of color and a lot of Caucasian people that are participating in these protests because they're protesting because of the history that we have in this country of people continuing to be marginalized who have historically been marginalized, and change is not occurring. And every day we turn on the TV and it seems like there's some other police shooting that was an inappropriate shooting, as we saw just here recently, and it doesn't seem to be any end in sight. But it's a good point to underscore that the people who are out here on the streets protesting aren't the ones who were born, as she says, with a silver spoon or live in a higher affluent socioeconomic zip code. She's correct.
We'll take a break on that note. When we come back, we've got Ron, Angela, Dawn, Ricky, and others. More phone calls for you, Nick, as we continue our conversation right after this. Stay with us.